Hello, hello. Welcome to Sentry Launch Week, Day 5. This is a little bit different than the previous days because we are live. This is not pre-recorded. You are getting live stream from Sentry World Headquarters. That's false. This is all virtual. We're all remote. My name is Chad Whitaker. I'm the head of open source at Sentry. And joining me are Armin Ronacher, what are you, principal architect at Sentry these days, Armin? What's your role?
Yep.
Does that sound right? And you're in Vienna. Yes? No, you're on the internet.
Yes, Vienna.
Okay. And we're also joined by Heather Meeker from OSS Capital. I'm going to reuse the intro you got at GitHub Universe the other day, Heather.
Oh no, that's gonna follow me forever.
Open source licensing royalty. Is that what it was, I believe? Yes. So yes, your Highness. Thank you for joining us, Heather. Appreciate having you here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, wrote the book on open source licensing. At least one, right?
Two now, yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so we are here to talk about the future of open source, to talk about licensing, and to share with you all some exciting news. If you haven't already heard it, because we've been working on this together in the open for the past couple months. But we're here to talk about Sentry's new license, which is called the Functional Source License. So let me bring up a screen share. All right. Do we have any way of seeing how many people are actually watching this stream? I know we can get, all right, stop screen. Yeah, I'm still, sorry. Sarah, you brought in my screen share. Sarah's behind the scenes here helping us. Where's my screen share? It's here. Can everybody see it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can see it. Hopefully they can see it out there too. Cool. Right, so this is our blog post about our new license. Introducing the Functional Source License, freedom without free riding. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit, let's do this. Let's do a little more intro. Armin, let's go with you first. Tell me how long you're principal architect at Sentry. How long have you been here? Give us a little bit.
I've been here 9 years.
Okay.
A very long time. I joined basically because I knew David, the founder. And we know of each other because through open source. I also know you through open source.
Sure.
So it was a pretty good reason to join an open source company, I think.
Do you remember what number employee you were?
I think technically I was the first one, but it was complicated. Because we didn't have an office, I was a contractor, I guess. So
started as a contractor. 2008, 2009?
No, 2015.
Oh, okay, not till. Gotcha.
So after the money was raised.
Yes.
But cool. I used Sentry before I worked on it. So also I contributed to Sentry before I worked on it. So true open source spirit.
Yes. And also, Armin, of course, you're the author of the Flask framework and Jinja 2, and now some Rust projects. What's your biggest non-Sentry open source project right now?
Did I actively maintain?
Sure.
My package manager, I think. I made a package manager for Python called Riter.
Yeah. So. Having fun with that. Very cool. All right, Heather, give us a little more about yourself. Tell us a little about your background and your open source licensing experience.
Well, let's see. I was a software developer in the 1980s, and then I went to law school. And after I got out of law school, I started working in software licensing. Did that for a while, and then very soon started hearing about open source licensing, and I thought, well, that's strange because it really is strange compared to regular proprietary licensing. So started learning more and more about it. And if you fast forward nearly 30 years, all I do is open source licensing as a lawyer. And then about 5 years ago, my business partner, Joseph Jacks, started OSS Capital, which is a venture fund that only invests in early stage commercial open source development.
Mm-hmm.
And so he invited me to join the fund. And 2 years ago, I joined as a general partner full time. Before that, I had been an advisor to the fund. So, in that respect, I work with the portfolio companies who are trying to build businesses around open source projects. So, I'm really engaged in open source, both in my law practice and in my investment work.
So it's been a couple years then at OSS Capital? You said
Yeah, full time, I've been there a couple of years.
Okay. Plug a couple of your companies for us. Give some names.
Oh, well, let's see. I'll just give you a couple of favorites. Cal.com, I love. They are an online scheduler and video conferencing platform.
Mm-hmm.
To me, well, first of all, their project is great. I use it all the time and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows to me that how an open source based product delivers better because it's not fussy, it's not difficult to use, it's inexpensive, and it's just a great product that's run by a great team. The other one that is very interesting to me is called W4 Games, and they are created around the Godot gaming engine, which is one of the, I would say, two big open source gaming engines.
Mm-hmm.
And so they provide a basis for developers to develop games, and they are generally very loved in the community. The W4 company does some commercial activity around that open core basis.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here with us again.
Thank you.
So let's get into it. So Sentry, let's review a little the history of Sentry licensing, and then let's talk about the business source license, which is the license that Sentry's been using for the past few years. And then we'll get into the functional source license, which is the new license that we're announcing today. And probably at that point, Armin, we can jump in and merge some PRs and have a little celebration. And then, I do want to kind of zoom out and talk about the bigger picture, the why of licensing, and why we relicense to BSL, why we're relicensing to FSL, and kind of talk about the broader trends and what's going on in the community and the industry. So a little bit of the history. Armin, you've been with Sentry since 2015. You committed, you were committed before that. Can you give us a little bit of the history of licensing with Sentry and where it started, and then maybe specifically about the change to the BSL?
Yeah. So Sentry started like a lot of projects with just not a license, I think. This is sort of the first commit, didn't have one.
Yeah.
And it picked the first proper license, which was the BSD license. I think the same reason why a lot of projects in that ecosystem picked it, and it was because someone else did. So the original ecosystem that Sentry came out of was a Django ecosystem, and David picked the BSD license. I picked the BSD license for a lot of projects for the same reason, which is like Django was licensed. I like the licensing terms. You could actually use it indiscriminately. My first open source project were GPL license, and I learned through that prevented some of my users to use it. So that was really nice. Sentry had that. And only a couple of years ago,
Hold on. So Armin, you were a GPL guy at first?
Yeah.
You switched? It's possible.
And then I made fiery articles on my blog about why I didn't like that decision.
Yeah. Wow. So you were copyleft, and then you switched over to permissive. Yeah. Okay. So then, all right. So then you were going to say a few years ago with Sentry.
Yeah, there's a few years ago at Sentry relicensed under what we call the BSL, but BUSL, the business source license. And that is more than 3 years ago now. When was it? 2018? 19? I don't remember. A while back. And I don't know if you want me to go into the motivations of this, but we heard some feedback on that, I would say.
Yeah, well, let's do that, because I think we're announcing the functional source license today. In a lot of ways, it's an evolution of the business source license. So let's Heather, I guess let's bounce over to you. Unpack for us. Tell us a little bit about the business source license, because I think you have some history with it too. So maybe you can tell us about that history and about what the business source license is trying to accomplish and what it does.
The business source license was originally created by a company called MariaDB. It was, and I think it's on its second iteration by now. I helped out with the second iteration, which sort of cleaned up some problems and dealt with some open source related issues with it. But the basic idea is it's what we IP lawyers call a springing license, meaning that you grant some rights on day one, and then rights get automatically granted in the future. That's the springing part of it.
Springing. Where does springing come from? I saw that term in passing and was like, huh.
It's jargon in the IP world for a license that gets granted later.
And that's forever? It's been like...
Yeah, that's been around for a long time. It's been a concept in licensing for a long time. This is kind of new to the open source world, because open source basically works like, here's a grant to everyone in the world at the same time, right? Yeah. That's actually one of the kind of novel characteristics of open source licensing. But for forever and a day, there have been agreements to grant licenses in the future. And from an IP point of view, sorry if this is too detailed for, but there's a difference between promising to grant a license and actually granting it. And one is what we call a covenant or a contract, and the other is a property right. So when you have a springing license, it's actually a property right. So you can't get rid of it. It's not just a promise that you could fail to keep.
Renege on.
Right? Yeah. From a legal point of view, that's actually very important, because if you're the beneficiary of the license, you can actually exercise the license if it was a springing license. If it was a covenant and the licensor then failed to keep the covenant, then you wouldn't have any IP rights. So
the covenant is the promise that you could get back on.
So BSL was different. It was a springing license. Yeah. And it kind of had two pieces to it. It's like the rights granted today and the rights granted in the future. Okay. And the rights that were immediately granted were characterized as non-production use. And then the rights in the future, after we did the second iteration, had to be under a GPL compatible license. And the time period was variable, but the maximum was 4 years. So when a licensor released code under that license, they said, okay, here's a code. Today, you can not use it for production use, but in 4 years or less, you will be able to use it under this GPL compatible license. And they chose a license. And that license, it kind of cooked along for a while, but it started to gain some popularity in the last few years. But people struggled with it. I don't know, should I talk about what the struggles are now, or do we want to talk about that later?
Well, let's get into, take us back to, what was it, 2016, I think, is when BSL MariaDB.
That's when we redid it, I think.
That was the redo. Okay. But because I want to kind of foreshadow kind of the bigger picture and the why here. What was the conversation behind why we needed the BSL and the springing license in the first world?
The idea is that for licensors who are in private business, they need to have a kind of first actor advantage in the market. And so they're saying, okay, here's our software. You can't use it for production use, which is not really all that clear, but basically non-commercial-ish kind of grant, right? And so we're the only people who get to exercise those rights during the first, say, 4-year period, so that we can sell licenses and so forth. But we're assuming that after 4 years, that version of the software that we released won't be commercially viable anymore.
Okay, but I want the dirt, Heather. Because it came out of MariaDB, right?
That's right. And they were building a business around kind of a reboot of MySQL after it was sold to Oracle.
because MySQL, of course, is GPL,
Right.
right? And
It's
then
GPL plus FOSS exception, but close enough.
plus FOSS exception.
Yeah. It makes no difference. It causes all the same problems that our mind like experienced with GPL.
Okay. Okay. So MySQL is GPL. MySQL sold to, wasn't it Sun first, then Oracle or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. First Sun, then Oracle. Well, sold to Sun, and Sun was sold to Oracle.
Okay. And then the original, if I remember right, is the original creators of MySQL, when they saw this happen.
Like many others at Sun,
Okay.
during that time, they decided, okay, no more, I'm not working for Oracle. And so they, I'm not ascribing motives to them. This was just what it seemed to me happened
Okay.
with a lot of people.
Okay.
And so they went off on their own to start MariaDB. And when they did that, they actually changed some of the licensing for what they were doing to make it a little more livable for business, both on the license or in licensing.
And was MariaDB an actual code fork of MySQL? I'm ignorant.
I'm sure it is now. I think it's compatible still with the API, but I wouldn't bet my life on that. The idea is that it should be a substitute for MySQL.
I just got a message. Turn off Slack notifications if possible. I don't think I have Slack notifications on, but I can try. Is that directed at somebody in particular? Sorry, chat. We can't. Let's see. Where are the comments coming through? Over in Discord. I feel disconnected from you all watching this. I'm sorry. We're in this application called StreamYard.com, and we get a comment stream from YouTube. So that's a good way to get directly on our radar. That's what I'm paying attention to. And we have a private chat where Sarah, who's helping us out, is proxying stuff from Discord and maybe Twitter, wherever else. So that's how you can get through to us if you're trying to connect. Okay, so MySQL, GPL, where do we go? Sun, Oracle. We want to fork, but we want to do the licensing differently. So is it fair to say that it was like, to protect from what Sun and Oracle did with MySQL?
I think it was more that they were starting a separate business around it. So MariaDB is still under GPL and so forth.
Is this like MaxScale or something? It's a particular component.
Yeah, it's actually, there's a foundation that runs that, I think. And then, but the MariaDB business created this business source license because they were looking to create, a licensing advantage for basically the half-life of the softwares. They were like many businesses today, they're trying to figure out how to make the open source part and the proprietary part that they're doing complement each other.
Armin, so let's jump forward. So we've got MariaDB and then the update of BSL in 2016. How did let's go to, because it was 2019 when Sentry was relicensed. So thank you, Ben. 4 years ago, November 29th. Yes. Talk me through that. Was it like?
So it's
was
different.
there an ongoing conversation that we need to relicense and then let's go find this license, or was it more like, hey, we're seeing people relicense to this BSL, maybe we should rethink what we do?
So, I mean, I do think that there was a trend at one point to relicense under BSL. I feel like we might have been contributing to this trend more than following it. So in Sentry's case, the situation is a little bit different because like MariaDB, you sort of license out and then someone runs this thing typically on their infrastructure. There might be like a cloud version too, but at least I think by the time when they started going down this licensing path, very much the motivation was like you carry this piece of software into your own infrastructure and there should be a way to be commercially compensated for it. That is actually not so much of a problem for Sentry because Sentry's business model is the SaaS version, which is you pay us money, we provide you the service of running this thing, the updated SDKs, the customer support, and everything that goes with it.
Yeah.
However, there's still sort of a second angle to this, which is that, well, first of all, we are an open source project, or at least we considered ourselves one at the time. And so we didn't want to lose that part. But there was also always this sort of risk that there is someone commercializing another SaaS version of the stuff that we are running, and they might be able to doing it in an environment that we can't provide for, as an example. And so there's a business reason why you want to have some sort of exclusivity period on the things that you're creating, because Sentry, there are many open source projects, but Sentry falls under some sort of a category of open source projects where the majority of contributions, in fact, all contributions to what is under the BOSL today, is from Sentry employees. That is different on the open source SDKs, where they are definitely under just an open source license, because we also want customers to be able to embed them. But so there's a business reason why you want to be protective to some degree.
Now, how did that pattern evolve, or was it intentional from the beginning? In other words, did there used to be more contributors to Sentry Core, and how do we go from the beginning of Sentry, when it was just kind of an open source, true open source non-commercial project, to the point where we said, actually, we're not really looking for outside contributions as much. We want.
Interesting enough, even prior to the event of raising money, Sentry had a very limited number of people that actually contributed. It was basically David and a bunch of people that eventually even got hired. And so it wasn't a project that accumulated huge amounts of outside contributions. It always had an opinion of how it should be, strong leadership and strong core contributions.
Okay. So that was in place by the time this, but then was there like one event? Did we start to see challenges like we're talking about, MariaDB, Sun, Oracle? Did we see particular challenges that kind of prompted us to take the step of relicensing?
So the short version is yes, but I don't think that going on like there's a triggering event that makes you think about it, but that's not necessarily such an important event. That you change the license because this thing has happened. But it makes you think about like, what are the core risks to a business, or how do you want to approach this? And at least at the time, we also had this idea that you want to have sustainable open source, and so there should be a model that is very liberal, because like one of the benefits of having something under a true open source license is that you can take some code, you can do some stuff with it. We don't want to destroy this, right? But there's definitely the situation that you have to figure out like how to not take away freedoms necessarily, but like how to like think about it. Is there evolution to this? Is there an alternative way of looking at it that helps a SaaS company?
Okay. So relicensed on, what was it? Ben put it in 4 years, so November 2019. Let's talk a little more about the BSL and the specifics of it, because Armin, you alluded to this. Sentry's use of the BSL is different than MariaDB's use of the BSL, and from other companies' use of the BSL. So let's talk about that. Heather, I'm going to bounce it back over to you. Tell us, get into the details of the BSL and kind of what I'm calling in this blog post, the flaws with the BSL, namely the kind of parameters and the way that each license is different. Can you talk about that for us for a bit? I think you might be muted. I don't know if that's on your side or us.
That's me. Sorry.
Cool.
The BSL, I would say, was a pioneering idea, right? But it had a few, shall we say, challenges with its execution. The first was that the baseline license grant for non-production use was not sufficiently clear for a lot of other adopters of BSL. So People came along and they wanted to use BSL, but
Mhm.
they weren't like that license restriction didn't work for them. Maybe it was too vague. Maybe it was too narrow. Because non-production is actually, in conventional licensing terms,
Mhm.
it's pretty narrow. Like it's basically testing, evaluation, research sort of thing, but it wasn't defined anywhere either.
Okay.
So people then started making these additional license grants, which was one of the features or bugs of the license, right? And
Mhm.
so when you see BSL used in the wild, it almost always has an additional license grant. So people would often say things like, okay, this is granted for non-production use. That's a baseline grant. And then we're granting you additional rights to use it for production use as long as you don't stand up a competing SaaS. I use that example because
Mhm.
that was what most companies were concerned about when they were trying to figure out how to adopt a license like this. And indeed, like almost all of the source available licenses that addressed this issue over the last 5 years or so, so you had a lot of those coming out, were focused on this like competing SaaS question, because that is the business that most software companies want to protect. Okay.
Mhm.
So what you ended up with was not just a baseline license, but a baseline license plus it's an additional use grant.
Mhm.
And some of them were really quite complicated.
Mhm.
So when somebody said we're using BSL, you didn't understand what it was because you then had to go and read all the additional use grants.
Mhm.
The other thing was because there was a variation in the so-called change license was pretty broad, and the timing. And you put all those together. If somebody said we're under BSL, that didn't answer your questions. You had to go and read the specific license, and you had to figure it out, and that resulted in what the open source community called license proliferation. But I mean, I don't like to focus on that term because all proprietary licenses are different.
Mhm.
But that kind of I guess it affected kind of the understanding and the branding of the BSL as a license. So that's what people struggled with when other companies adopted BSL, other than MariaDB.
Gotcha. All right. Let's shift gears and talk about the future, because so far we've been talking about the past. Let's talk about the functional source license. I'm going to bring up, let's see, this tab. So this is fsl.software, which is the web page that we put together for the functional source license. And Heather, I'm going to have you keep going. Talk us through then. We just talked about the BSL and the details of it and maybe some of the challenges with it. Give us an overview of the FSL and how it kind of addresses those challenges.
Okay, so from a 50,000-foot view, it's similar. It has a baseline license grant and then a springing license grant. But the objective here is to reduce the amount of variation so that it's clearer what the license means, and also have some more precision. So you have the choice of only 2 licenses, Apache or MIT, for the change license. So that means when the springing grant happens, it's one of those 2, both of which are permissive licenses. Okay, so that's great because people then know, okay, this is going to be a permissive license that I can easily use for anything I want after the set period of time. So that's kind of the first characteristic. And then why don't we page down a little bit if we can
Want to
there?
go into one of these, or?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay, cool.
So you can see that there's a license grant if you page down a little bit there. And the permitted purpose is instead of non-production, what we've focused on is competing use. And so we've been, pretty detailed about what is a competing use. And this is structured to protect the kind of uses that most software licensors want to protect when they're adopting a license like this.
Can you talk through the competing uses? It was instructive for me when you were helping us draft this.
Yeah. So
what competition can mean with the
so I once studied economics a long time ago, so I tend to think of competition in the economic sense, meaning a product that if you sell it means another product won't be sold. We call that cross elasticity of demand, but you don't need to remember that fancy term.
You couldn't quite get that term in here in the license.
Yeah, but we did incorporate the idea of a substitute good. So if you have software and then you're marketing other software as a substitute for it, that would be a competing use. We also address this in the other couple of ways that licenses like this usually address what competition means. The second one is exposing the APIs. That's more of a functional approach to defining a competing use. Like the first is more of an economic one or a business one. The second is more of a technical one. And then the third is, I guess, kind of a cross between the two. It's the substantially the same or substantially similar functionality. So we've come at it from all the angles that people usually come at this issue to try to be as clear as possible about what uses are not permitted. And then we go even further and we say, by the way, these are specifically permitted: internal use, non-commercial education, non-commercial use, and development services. That last one is a question that, in my experience, many developers ask about licenses like this. Can I provide professional services in connection with this software if, I'm not really the one who is running the software? So we wanted to be clear about all of that. So we hope that with this definition of competing uses and permitted purposes, there will be a lot more clarity about what the baseline license grant allows.
Cool, thank you. Let's see what else is left here. So there is a patent grant.
There's a patent grant which is reasonably broad, and it doesn't probably not worth spending a lot of time talking about. It just clarifies that the licensor can't take 2 bites at the apple. And then if you redistribute, you have to include notices. Everybody's, familiar with that, with open source and so forth. Disclaimers, no trademark license. Then we get to kind of the meat of this, which is the springing license. And so an important difference between this and BSL is that this has a set date of the 2nd anniversary of the release of the specific release. So you don't have to wonder what the change date is. You can figure it out quite easily. And then it has the specific license here. And we have a couple of different versions of this, one for MIT and one for Apache. But it should be also easy to figure that out because they're actually, they have different designators. Are these SPDX designators already? I don't remember. They should be soon.
Yes.
But so you can tell immediately just by looking at the names here. Okay, I now know what this license does. I don't have to read an additional license grant, use grant. I don't have to figure out what the change date is. I don't have to figure out what the change license is. So it's much more sort of user friendly.
Well, and you mentioned SPDX. The idea is that we intend to get this included in SPDX, which is a list of, let's see. Well, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. But the point is that
it's a unique designator for a license.
Exactly, that can then be used in tooling. So companies like FOSSA and other scanning services, people that use those right, those identifiers in other software for compliance, scanning and things like that. Yeah, the goal is to have this be a fixed, it means one thing, which, like we said, BUSL 1.1 does not right now. Cool. Yeah. All right. So yeah, so this is FSL. It's up on FSL software. We are, okay, so we have a bit of a race condition here, Armin, Heather, because now the license is out in the world. Sentry has not actually applied this license to our projects yet. So somebody else who's watching this stream could sneak in ahead of us, apply this license to one of their projects before we do, and they would be the first ones in the world to adopt FSL, which would make this page a lie immediately. And it'd be wonderful. Okay, so we are going to get to some more conversation about the bigger picture of this, but let's go ahead and switch over here. So this is our...
So Chad, we should mention something here. The moment you press the relicense button, right, we're lowering that window from 3 years to 2 years. Right? It's a big thing.
Yeah, let's talk about that too. Armin. Get back to that. Yeah, but we'll make this race condition a little worse. Let's talk about this this 4 years change. What is it? The change date in USL defaults to 4 years, but it's a parameter, so it can be changed. So Sentry, for example, in our BUSL implementation uses 3 years. But with this, we're going to 2 years. So Armin, talk to us about the change from 4 years to 2 years, and your take on that.
So I think that the way from not from a legal perspective, but from a way emotional perspective, I think it's worth looking at this language is that it's really an exclusivity period. And afterwards, it's true to the core open source, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you want to have a standardized license and you want everybody sort of to be aligned on sort of what this exclusivity period is, 2 years, I think, is a pretty good sweet spot. But it's also kind of aggressive in a way. It forces you to keep innovating, building things, because you're sort of your own worst enemy in a sense, right? If you don't do anything for 2 years, then the open source version and your thing is the same. So I personally think it's a pretty interesting model, and I really do hope that people adopt this if they want to make a new startup that also wants to combine it with open source. Mm-hmm. And it's really a model that's specifically targeted at SaaS kind of companies that are sort of quickly innovating and building new things into it. Yeah, but this means the moment we merge this, we're basically speeding up compared to where we were before with the Apache 2 switchover.
By 30%.
I would second that and say 2 years is it's assertive, right? Mm. I mean, because if you think about what the half-life of software is, it's probably a little bit longer than that. So this license really kind of pushes the commitment to open source forward for a licensor. And in that respect, it's I think it's a lot more exciting than something that might be 4 years out.
Yeah. And it should be said too, Armin, you were just alluding to this. This license isn't for everybody. One of the, I guess, the trade-off with taking the BUSL and making it more concrete does mean that we kind of have to make some decisions. So we've sort of alluded to this already. It's not really fit for companies that monetize self-hosting or on-premise use, like we're talking about databases and things like that. It really is designed for companies like Sentry that monetize SaaS. Yeah, but that's we feel like that's a big enough kind of scope of companies and software that we're kind of finding that balance of how do we make something concrete that's also broad enough to be interesting. Cool. Okay, so are we ready now to click some buttons? So this is our internal, though public, ticket about launching the FSL. So you can see that we landed the 1.0 on FSL.software. These are all of the repos that we have licensed under FSL. Is this what I'm doing as I'm clicking through? I'm at least going to do a few of these. There's a lot of repos here, okay? Because we've also got, so Sentry has two products, Sentry itself and then CodeCov, which is also BSL right now as of a couple months ago, and we're going to relicense both. So let's celebrate this first one. This is Get Sentry Sentry. This is our main repo, which is the Django monolith. Here's David Kramer proved this 18 hours ago. So if CI is green, Armin, did you approve this one? Yes. All right, you ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Oops. Gotta click a couple times. And yay! Sentry is now licensed under the FSL.
I feel like those NASA scientists.
Who knew? Yeah, licensing, software licensing could be so thrilling. Here we are. Cool. So that's the Sentry repo. This one's red, self-hosted. Oh, you know what? This is flaky CI. Isn't this embarrassing? We're gonna rerun. I was gonna do self-hosted next. All right, we'll rerun that one. Let's see. Let's do a few more. Hey, you already did. Did you do the rest? You did docs.
But the next one is stuck on CI again. So
Relay. What's it on? Relay's complex. What's it stuck on?
I don't know.
Code owner review from Get Sentry Code Owners Legal. Wow, who's even in Owners Legal? We're gonna have to do that one later. Gavin, we got to get you added to Owners Legal so you can approve this for us. Okay, so what's this one? This is Snuba. Snuba ready to go? No. Okay. Again, legal. This is great.
Those lawyers.
That's lawyers.
We've got our license.
Gavin, come on.
You've already looked at all these. This one's waiting for owner Snuba. All right, fair enough. This one we can do. Vroom we can do, right? Come on. Change logs. All right. Well, we'll have to come back to all these. Let's do at least one CodeCov one though. We'll come back and we'll clean up the rest of the Sentry ones later today after this call. All these. This one we can merge. Okay. These are our develop docs. Merge attempt failed. Armin, get out of here. Did you already do these?
Not all of them.
You're gonna leave me Kafka. Lint changes. I'm not gonna do that yet because I don't trust the lint changes on the MD. All right, I'm gonna skip these. I'm gonna go down. Let's see which ones do we get. 2, sure, fine. Sentry itself is relicensed. That's the big one, right? All right, we'll come back and do the rest of these later. Let's get maybe we can do. These were approved. Trying to prove this one. All right, so I'm gonna do CodeCov self-hosted. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Yay! Cool. All right, so CodeCov is now relicensed to FSL. All right, I'm gonna dial out from there. Yeah, we'll go up and clean up the rest of these later. Cool. Let's zoom out a little bit. We got 15 minutes left on this call. Sarah, how are we doing in chat? Anybody watching this? Anybody out there in Discord or on YouTube or on Twitter have questions for us? You've got Heather Meeker. You've got Armin Roniker. It's not every day that you get to just ask these two royalty. I mean, you're both royalty here. This is your chance. So if you got a question for Armin or for Heather, please put it in Discord, put it on Twitter, put it on YouTube, and Sarah will help us surface that here. Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about the bigger picture. So we talked about FSL, streamlined for SaaS companies. Yes. Let's talk about why. This is where I'm gonna bring up. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna bring up. I'm gonna talk about some of the recent history of how we got here. Sentry. We talked about. We relicensed Sentry to BSL in 2019. At the end of last year, so about a year ago, we bought a company called CodeCov. So Sentry acquired CodeCov, and CodeCov was not open source. It wasn't even source available. It was closed source. when we bought it. And I remember the first day I don't work out of the San Francisco office usually, but I happened to be there on the day that we were announcing to the company at an all hands that we were acquiring CodeCov, and Jared and Eli from CodeCov were there in the office to make the announcement. And after the announcement, I pulled them aside in the cafeteria and I said, "All right, guys, you ready to open source this thing?" And they said, "Slow down, what?" And then they said, "Oh, actually, yeah, let's do it." So this past summer in July, I guess it was, is when we kind of flipped the switch and did a lot of work to clean up the CodeCov repos, get all the secrets out of them, clean them up, and get them ready to publish to the world. So a lot of effort went into that. And we, again, flipped the switch in late July, and then we published a blog post about it, which we said that CodeCov is open source. And this generated some conversation in the community because we released CodeCov under the business source license. So let's address this head on. So business source license, Heather, is the business source license an open source license?
No, not exactly, because it has a license restriction, and the basic rule of open source licenses is that they have no license restrictions. They can have conditions like source code sharing or say notices, but anything that has what we call in licensing a field of use restriction would not be open source. Now, what business source license is this category called source available, which I alluded to before. And that's a growing category. Yeah, I see this is the open source definition. It's actually quite long. By the way, if you want to look at something a little more digestible, the free software definition is shorter. Yeah. But can we bring that up, by the way, like the free software definition? Because I think that's actually very interesting to look at.
I think it's on this page.
Yeah. Okay. So go down to the 4 freedoms. It's down below. Yep. Where are the 4 freedoms on there?
Grab it. 4 freedoms. The 4 essential freedoms. This one right here, right?
Yes. If you look at the first one of those, the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, you can almost stop after that one. And that's that freedom 0. I love that it's called freedom 0 because only a coder would start counting at 0. But that is, if you're asking what is open source, this is actually the main thing people focus on. So source available licenses have license restrictions, usually non-commercial, non-production, no competing SaaS, etc. So they're not technically open source. That's when you're talking about open source licensing. And it can get a little bit didactic because to most developers, open source kind of means I get access to the source code. And they don't stand on ceremony quite so much as some other people about, the definition of open source. So it's easy to see why, somebody would call something open source and it actually has a license restriction. But yeah, technically not open source. And there's a fair amount of I would say, angst in the open source community about people misusing the term. And so that's why those kinds of issues pop up. But I will point out that something like the FSL or business source license actually has a springing open source grant in it. So it's a lot closer to open source than some of the others that don't have that feature. And for that reason, I think some people in the open source community are coming around a little bit to understand the value of such a license to open source and how it actually guarantees freedom 0, at least at some point in the future.
Well, and to
this chat, and this is sort of a philosophical argument here, right? A lot of it has to do, I think. So I think we can all agree that neither one of those licenses are an open source license by today's definition, and probably that definition will never change. However, the change date actually matters a lot, because hypothetically, if you were to just look at two different development models, there's a development model where you put every change on GitHub, and I think the another development model that was very popular like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was that you kind of develop in secret and you make one bigger release available like once a year, once every 6 months, right? Put it on a tarball somewhere on an FTP. And in some sense, I think if I were to just develop 2 years in secret and use it myself, and then only like make a new release available to others, that's technically still open source, but it comes down to pretty much the same thing, which is that you have 2-year-old code, right? So there's I'm not going to argue the specifics on it, but like there's an element to this where if you're definitely guaranteed that thing is going to eventually turn into open source, as you lower the change date at one point, it's like if it becomes open source after a day, it's like, well, is it really still a restriction? That's hard to say, right? So there's an element to ambiguity in it.
You've made a very good point, which is that there are actually a number of companies that do this kind of delayed release model. I sometimes call it an embargo model, right? So they sell rights to the code that's developed in private first to their paying customers, and then later they release the code as open source on a set schedule. The FSL kind of codifies that, right? And so you're right that like when people see this other model, they sometimes complain that it's not really open source, mainly because the code is not developed in the open. And so it's important to understand that the open source definition is more a definition of licensing than it is a development model. And what the open source community really is interested in the development model. So this, if you can develop in the open with something like FSL, that is in a way closer to the open source development model that the community expects.
All right, let's. We do have a question that came through. We've got 8 minutes left on the clock, and we definitely want to address this. So let's see. Vicente asks, what does this change in licensing mean for Sentry users in practice?
So in practice, for anyone using the SaaS version, probably doesn't mean much, but maybe not, because the way I like to think about all of our the open source culture that we have, but specifically the license that we have, is that you're, as a Sentry user, you're always safe, right? Like even if something monstrously happens to the company, like worst case of 2 years, like everything is there as before. Like there will always be a future of it. We're very sort of protective in the sense of like the lasting of the product, even hypothetically beyond an existence of the company. The most significant impact right now is that if you want to poke around in the fully open source version, it's a little bit quicker there than it was before.
Yeah, exactly. So the nothing changes. The big change is from I guess for us it's from 3 years to 2 years, right? That's the material change in Sentry's licensing now. It reaffirms and kind of strengthens our commitment to doing right by the community here, I think is what we would say. Let's I want to get to one last point here before we wrap up, which is this question of, Heather, you were kind of talking through open source, the open source definition. We've got the free software for freedoms, these licensing kind of details. But then this, what does the open source community actually care about? What are the licenses really designed to encode? And it's this kind of public community centric approach to building software together. And I think kind of building on that, something else that the open source community has come to care about more maybe than it did. And I think this is a result of the success of open source in the past 25 years, because this year's the 25th year of the coining of the term open source, right? 1998, here we are in 2023. And with all the success of open source in the past 25 years, what we've come to learn is that there is a problem that comes with that success, which is this free rider problem. So Heather, maybe I can put you on the spot because we didn't warm this up, but you said you do have an economics background. Would you be willing to unpack for us a little bit what the free rider problem refers to?
Yeah, so it's a big topic, but I'll try to make this short and digestible. The free rider problem, or sometimes it's called cloning or strip mining sometimes, came about primarily because licenses like GPL don't impose any conditions for use of software, only on distribution. So as the industry moved away from a distribution model to mostly SaaS models today, the GPL did not do anything to really preserve the community, like the commons for the software, because you could take the software, use it for SaaS, make all the changes you want, and there wouldn't be any obligation to share anything. That's the way almost all open source licenses work. AGPL is the exception, by the way. But even it does not really prevent people from using software, selling access to it, and not sharing their changes. So that's why the source available licenses became popular, because businesses that were trying to have a sustainable, business model in open source, if all the big cloud providers could just provide access to their software, those cloud providers were much better able to sell the software because their customer relationships are sticky. It's just like checking a box, right? And they would have complete rights to use the software without paying anything or contributing anything back. So that was the free rider issue that really started to cause people heartburn in the last 5-10 years.
It's interesting that you frame it in terms of both contributions or monetary payments. Usually I think here I've got this link to Wikipedia, which doesn't even talk about software specifically. In the social sciences, the free rider problem is a type of market failure that occurs when people use public goods and don't pay for them or underpay.
It's just like polluting the air or camping out in a public place, right? It takes resources that are supposed to be available to everyone, and it privatizes them.
I think the classic example is, if there's a common meadow, it is the commons, and everybody brings their few cows and sheep there to graze on it. Well, if there's too many people coming to graze on this public meadow, then you get this idea of overgrazing. I don't know if the term's used in here.
It's a classic economic example called the tragedy of the commons.
Tragedy of the commons, yes. Yeah, so I think in the open source world, in the software world, honestly, I brought up this free rider, this term, and to somebody who's quite big in the open source community, and they never heard of it. I feel like this is a term that we need to be talking about more in open source. In open source, when we talk about open source sustainability, like this is a classic free rider problem. We're not the first ones to hit this, or to there's been a lot of research about this, and the message I want to leave is, with this license, we're trying to address this question of the tragedy of the commons in open source. I want to leave this connection. We just a couple months ago gave per capita quite a bit of money to non-commercial open source projects. The reason we're able to do that is because we have a successful business. The reason we're able to have a successful business is because of the licensing that we've got in place. So there's this connection between sustainability for ourselves as a company and the sustainability of the wider non-commercial open source community. So that's really the larger why for this license, for this, taking the BSL, cleaning it up, saying, okay, that was a pretty good, first attempt at this springing license idea. Let's clean it up, focus it specifically for SaaS companies, and offer it to the world. So the invitation is for the SaaS companies in the world. So Heather, you've got a few SaaS companies that newer SaaS companies that you know about with your work at OSS Capital. But the message is for all for all of these startups out there that are thinking about I like open source. I'd like for my product to be open source, but I want to build a business on it. Take a look at take a look at the functional source license, the FSL. This codifies what's worked great for us at Sentry, and it's kind of packaged up and put out into the world in a way that we hope others can use as well. So fsl.software is the website where you can learn more about it. And Heather, Armin, thank you so much for joining, for celebrating this launch moment with us. Any final words, Heather?
No, I'm very excited about this, and thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to participate. And it was great talking to both of you this morning.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Armin, any final words?
Well, if you have a SaaS business startup, maybe consider that license. Mm-hmm. I feel a lot more confident about this one than putting people down the USL path. So I think something there.
Good. All right. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Sarah, for helping us out behind the scenes with all this. I guess this is the end of Sentry launch week, right? This is it. So thank you for everyone, to everyone who joined us for Sentry's launch week, and we'll keep the conversation going in Discord and Twitter and X and elsewhere. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Armin. We'll see you.